Good afternoon. Before we begin with Frankfurt School's detailed philosophical discussions on modernity, enlightenment, and emerging forms of control and authority, let's discuss very briefly on the genealogy of the concept of instrumental reason. And Frankfurt School has been identified as a major uh, kind of group of scholars who identified normative sources of critique to understand the formation of capital as well as exploitation, which is realized through the rationalization of social relations under the rubric of instrumental rationality. Now, this seems very familiar to us because we have already read uh, these issues in Weber, and if you uh, just revise our discussions on Bourdieu, you will find some references to this in Bourdieu as well. And critical theory tried to argue that this process through which the whole of the society is uh, brought within the paradigm of capital and modern instrumental reason is something that we should understand very carefully. And this process contributes to the delegitimization of all forms of normative reasoning, moral reasoning, and other forms of social interactions. The important figure to understand how academia as well as moral thinking has approached the question of instrumental reason is to begin with Kant, and particularly Immanuel Kant's text called Critique of Pure Reason. I have already shared this very interesting table. So these are a range of possibilities to understand how the instrumental reason is uh, termed through different kinds of theories and theoretical models, and in what ways the critique has responded to it by drawing upon their own notions of substantive reason. So Kant's text called Critique of Pure Reason is considered as the first modern critique of instrumental scientific reason. Now, listen this statement very carefully, because I'm saying Kant's Critique of Pure Reason is considered as the first modern critique of instrumental scientific reason. It is not a non-modern critique of scientific reason. So keep that in mind. And he was trying to approach the question of human freedom, rationality, judgment, morality, and he was saying that if Newtonian mathematics and Newtonian physics is about to dominate the all forms of rationalities, then all human freedom and moral norms will be dissolved within this particular mechanical forms and mechanical understandings of nature. And that's how Kant's work. So there is a series. If you just look at the books written by Kant, there is a one text called Critique of Pure Reason, there is a critique of judgment, there is a critique of morality, critique of synthetic reason, critique of practical reason, and so on and so forth. And the attempt has been that Kant tried to save practical moral reason from the strangulations of it by theoretical scientific reasons, by arguing that, of course, theoretical instrumental reason is one form of encountering the world, but it is not the only form. And it doesn't pose itself as a form of causal necessity that you delegitimize all other forms of reasoning and just uh, pro kind of pose this as inevitable, way of conceptualizing the world, and uh, how do we approach the world as an object of knowledge. He says that reason in part tries to constitute its object domain by imposing a rational form on the deliverances of the senses. And deliverances of the sense mean that how do we understand human sensitivity and projections through certain categories, for example, space, time, substance, community, right? So Kant was very clear with this, that how do we approach the world and what kind of knowledge is possible. So he says that the formation of rational understanding of the world also means that we are trying to understand the world as it appears to human subjects, not trying to understand world as it appears to itself, right? Which would be very difficult exercise indeed. And in Kant's terms, as far as I have read and understood Kant, it is likely very impossible to achieve that kind of knowledge. So that's why Kant uh, tried to bring in alternative modes of rational understandings. Opposing to the theoretical instrumental reason, Kant brings in the idea of moral reason normatively, which governs ground on which, on the basis of which it is rational to act. So try to understand this part very clearly, and because this would be something which will be referred to by critical school theorists again and again in their writings, particularly the Dialectics of Enlightenment, if you read that text. So what is Kant saying? Kant is saying that as opposed to instrumental reason, we can bring in moral reason and say that the moral reason normatively governs certain grounds on the basis of which it seems rational to act. Right? So he's trying to provide a different interpretations of the relation between rational acts, moral reasons, and uh, how do they relate to the action. So there is a very popular quote by uh, Kant, and it gives a hint about the way he was trying to understand not just reason but also various other important concepts, universality, for example. And the quote is like this: he says, act only according to the maxim by which you can at the same time uh, will that it should become a universal law. So you say that your grounds to act should be something that it is possible to make it as a and turn into a universal law. And he says this is what is contested by the instrumental reason. He says that the instrumental reason brings in the norm of universality into deliberate considerations through which reasons for actions are found. So both theoretical as well as practical reason are products of human spontaneous responses, whereas third person is the dominant paradigm in theoretical reason, while practical reason focuses on first person response and agent response, as he calls it. And that's how Kant is trying to bring a debate supplementing theoretical reason with practical reason. And later on, many philosophers who were uh, engaging with questions popular in idealist paradigm in the philosophy, they were supporting Kant's efforts to safeguard human freedom and morality from the dominance of scientific instrumental reason. And but they also had their own interpretations, and they said the Kant's emphasis that morality itself should become another universal law seems to us like another version of scientific instrumental reason. How far that goes like this, we need to read a little bit about it, and then only we can engage with this question. And Kant basically was trying to tell in simple words that uh, by asking the agents to disown their own sympathetic concerns, their own value judgments, and they should bracket their emotions, their desires, their passions, and focusing only on the rational morality. Now, this seems to many of them as another form of alienation and domination. And many people would simply call that Kant's approach in itself